So I already recorded a little video for this and decided to cut it. A little more of a live reaction for the trailer. But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, yeah, this doesn't really necessitate that. And there's not really anything too surprising to get my direct reaction to. Unless I start, exaggerating myself into a cartoon, as I'm sure most YouTubers do. Oh my god, Azazel. Anyways, the meaty part here of this reveal that I'm sure everyone else has already seen, but in case anyone gives a shit about what I think, which I don't know, the meaty part here is the pretty well full lowdown, it looks like, on the meat of the Warriors of Chaos update, as well as this Lord pack. We're still going to see Valkia, Violet, and Festus down the line, but it's really only going to be hiding their models and their campaign mechanics, because really all the DLC's contents are revealed right here in this blog right here, which is the important part. So, I've given myself a little bit of time since the news came out to stew on it a bit more, and it sounds incredible. For one thing, it is a Lord pack with 4 Lords, and they're directly calling it a Lord pack now. I think before they were calling it a Champion pack or something. But that does raise the question of what's the price range going to be. It's 4 Legendary Lords, and it's a shit ton of units, though only one of them is very high budget. So if they put it at $20, I think that's perfectly reasonable. I think this is a load of content, but that might make people mad. We'll see, I guess. Azazel looks amazing. You can see right here in this picture. Hang on, let's see. I can't pull that picture up. Either which way, this picture you can see the Knights of Slaanesh right there. So that already is a big change. But then you move on down the list, and we've got marked versions of all the Lords and Heroes, marked versions, well, not all the Lords and Heroes, but marked versions of Lords and Heroes and units for all the Chaos Gods. This being in addition to the marked versions that we already have in the game by default. And the Chaos War Shrine is the only really new unit. I think this is awesome because the idea of getting all this marked stuff was kind of a pipe dream for me. Marked Lords and Heroes with unique models, marked Chaos Warriors, marked Marauders with unique models, all of it, I didn't think could happen. And yet here we are. Some people are going to be a bit butt mad that they won't be getting their flashy new single entity monsters. But I think it's kind of inevitable we're going to see those down the line anyways. This isn't going to be the last DLC Chaos gets. Though this might be the last DLC Warriors of Chaos get. But if they add the Slaughter Brute to Khorne or the Vortex Beast to Tzeentch, they'll probably still throw it into the Warriors of Chaos as well. Because they had them on the tabletop, and Crave Assembly does care about tabletop accuracy. If Crave Assembly didn't care about tabletop accuracy, then this 4 Lord pack would not be all for the Warriors of Chaos. It would be Azazel for Slaanesh, Violet for Tzeentch, and so on. Which does lead me to the interesting part here of there is no real indication that you can use these Legendary Lords for the Demons of Chaos outside, for the Monogod specifically, outside of custom battles. I could understand why, but that is rather strange for a Game 1 race to get an entire Lord pack to itself, and it be the first DLC, and the Monogods to still be stuck with 1 Lord each. I do not really mind it. I dig the Warriors of Chaos. I dig specifically using the Warriors of Chaos to run mixed Warrior and Demon builds. And the Monogods will still be getting a lot of support through this DLC because they'll be getting all the marked stuff for each respective god, which will be a massive change for each of them. It paints the idea that we're definitely going to get each of the demon named characters from the lore, though. Which is particularly annoying for Slaanesh, because Slaanesh only has really 2 named demons from the lore, Nakari and the Mask of Slaanesh. And I can't see... Well, it'll be interesting to see if Crave Assembly tries to make any new ones, or just accepts Slaanesh only gets 2 Legendary Lords. But it's definitely very exciting for Tzeentch, because, the Changeling is pretty well guaranteed, but I was one of the people pulling for the Blue Scribes. I even have the Blue Scribes miniature. So that's nice. It does also, unfortunately, mean I can't. It'll be interesting to see whether or not Crib Assembly really is inclined to the idea of whether or not that there can be a maximum amount of legendary lords per race. And I'm not saying like setting an arbitrary hard cap. I couldn't see them doing that. But I mean like saying maybe we shouldn't have one race get the lion's share of the support. And with 8 legendary lords, the Warriors of Chaos are going to be leading the race pretty hard for legendary lords. That's one more than Lizardmen having 7. And I thought that was insane. Though the idea of 8 legendary lords for the Lizardmen sounds awesome because that opens the door for my boy Teto Echo, who I actually have a t-shirt of. So, I definitely am very interested in the idea of more legendary lords for some of these pre-existing races. And the idea of entire Lord packs for Game 1 or Game 2 races, the Game 2 races don't really need it, but entire Lord packs for Game 1 races, I mean, I'm not the biggest Empire guy. I think I've been vocal about that on videos before. But I'd be interested in a Elector Count Lord pack, where we get, Marias Liat Dwarf, Boris Toddbringer. I nearly called him Barris Toddbringer. Technically, he is a Baron, though, I think, so I'm half right. Elspeth von Draken, I know she's not an Elector Count, but she's close enough. She's pretty well the one who fills in for, what's her name? Oh, I forget the name of the actual Elector Countess of Wissenland. Or Vissenland, whichever you're supposed to call it. And for the 4th one, sky's the limit, honestly. They could try and flesh out the characterization of any of the other Elector Counts. So, this opens a whole new realm of fun that I think could be interesting to go down. Azazel has his own unique set of faction effects, of course. The big one here is plus 80 diplomatic relations with human nations. That is insane. That is actually nuts. Because that, for one thing, gives him a tremendous ability to use the seductive influence on the various human factions of the world. Which, Nakari has a lot of bonuses to seductive influence, but if you've played him in the Realm of Chaos campaign for any length of time, you very quickly notice it's easier for him to throw his weight around influencing, say, the Norskins or the Warriors of Chaos than it is for him to influence the human good guy races. This will also be interesting because it's a Warriors of Chaos faction getting good diplomacy with the civilized human nations of Warhammer World. I'm generally in favor of there being more open diplomatic possibilities. I think it's goofy when you see a Dwarf Skaven alliance or a Lizardman Demon alliance. But, at the end of the day, the Warhammer lore tends to contain loads of examples of odd bedfellows. And I don't know about full-on dedicated Warrior of Chaos alliances with, say, the Empire or Kislev, but the lore is very definitely full of Norska having instances of getting along with these more civilized human races of the Warhammer world. So I like to see more of that, definitely. And of course, Azazel having a stronger connection with the civilized human races of the Warhammer world, is a big lore send-up to the fact that Azazel, back when he was a mortal man and not yet a demon prince, was, oh boy, always during recordings. I guess it's because I start talking. Azazel, in life as a mortal man, was a personal friend of Sigmar. So Azazel has more of a connection to the civilized human races of the Warhammer world than the rest of the demons, and specifically Slaanesh. Because Nakari especially has more of a connection with the elves than he does with humanity. And on top of that, he, of course, gets access to the full suite of Slaanesh mechanics, same as Sigvald does. So Sigvald's going to be kind of, I guess, more warlike than Azazel. Azazel's more encouraged to use the seductive influence, whereas Sigvald's a little more aggressive. Azazel will probably, because he starts out in, let's see, they released the start position map. Azazel starts out in Norska. Sigvald starts out in Nagaroth. Sigvald is probably going to be beating the Dark Elves into submission until they submit to him, whereas Azazel is probably more discreetly infiltrating the human nations of the Warhammer world. So I appreciate the contrast. That, and it looks like Azazel can only mark units, lords, and heroes for Slaanesh, which makes sense. He's a demon prince of Slaanesh already. Whereas Sigvald, while he gets bonuses to Slaanesh stuff, Sigvald also does get the ability to mark lords, heroes, and units for the other 3 Chaos Gods. So that's already very different approaches right there. Azazel, it does look like, is going to be a demon prince. He flies, he's strong, he's got all that. Plus he's got a variety of aura buffs and debuffs. So sounds honestly kind of similar to Be'lakor, though I'd assume not nearly as strong. It is cool that we've now got 3 legendary demon princes in the game. That's a really nice touch. And then this blog gets into, let's see, the actual campaign goal that Azazel and the other 3 lords from this pack will be going for. And they are going for Zanbai Jin. I want to say that is a part of the Tamarkon lore. I almost want to say that the 4 Sons of the Great Kurgan were supposed to go for that with the Tamarkon lore, though sadly because of the end times, the Sons of the Great Kurgan lore got cut off and Forge World was never able to finish their Great Kurgan arc. But it definitely sounds very interesting for them to expand on Zanbai Jin in that whole area, especially if this ends up leading to Tamarkon. Though Tamarkon alone is already interesting, because it begs the question of, are they going to do a second champion pack? Because there's definitely room. Because Violet is not really the most popular Tzeentch guy. There's also Egrim Van Horstman and Eicheld Hellbrass. Egrim's pretty important to the lore, I want to say, because he, for one thing, represents a Imperial Wizard gone bad, but also he leads, I believe, the most extensive Tzeentch cult in the Warhammer world. Eicheld Hellbrass has not been relevant in the lore for a long time, but I think he's cool, I think he's fun, I think he's different from other Chaos Lords. Though both of those guys get added by Mixu already, and while I've not played their campaign yet, because I don't care for Warhammer 1 or Warhammer 2's implementations of Warriors of Chaos, with this new Warrior of Chaos model, Egrim and Eicheld will probably be really fun campaigns when Mixu releases his Legendary Lords. It is interesting that they are deciding to just forget the race for Ursun altogether. It does beg the question of how will the Chaos Champion Legendary Lords interact with the Realm of Chaos, if at all. But I find it amusing that the DLC team is more or less just acknowledging that the Realm of Chaos race, the Ursun race, kind of sucks. And the decision to make it where, even though the Realm of Chaos race, the Ursun race, was built in such a way where the DLC races and Legendary Lords can participate in it. You know, you can already see right now in Warhammer 3 that the Ogre Kingdoms participate in the Ursun race, even though in Warhammer 2, the Tomb Kings and Vampire Coast never participated in the Vortex race. But the DLC team for Warhammer 3 went, fuck all that. We really don't want to participate in this bullshit. It sucks. And I didn't hate the Realm of Chaos campaign as much as most people, but yeah, as soon as I finished my first Realm of Chaos campaign with Greasus, I just went, I don't need to play this campaign again. I'll just wait till Immortal Empires drops. And I think a lot of Warhammer 3 players went through that. I still check in for mods and stuff, but yeah. And here we get into the actual Warriors of Chaos campaign mechanics. Chaos Gifts, which looks very interesting. It seems to be faction-wide buffs that you spend souls for. You get souls from battles, it looks like. And these can either just be general faction-wide buffs, like all undivided units cause fear, which I think is interesting. That is an encouragement to keep some of your units undivided. That's, because that was going to be part of the thing of Warriors of Chaos being implemented, is undivided units, logically speaking, would just be straight up worse than their marked equivalents. Which would make sense on some level, but at the same time, sometimes some people, this would include myself, might want to do a playthrough with a focus on Chaos Undivided, especially if you're playing Kolek, because Kolek is pretty distinctively undivided. And having that there to encourage you to have more undivided units, I think is really cool. There's this here, more casualty replenishment, melee attack, and experience for Marauders. I appreciate any instance of Creative Assembly encouraging players to use early game units in the late game. I still think the best way to do this is tabletop caps, but Creative Assembly has said that's out of the picture, not a possibility. I understand why. I will continue to use Drunk Flamingo's tabletop caps mod. It is a necessity for me. It just bugs me getting to turn 200 and Marauders or Empire Swordsmen being extinct. And we see a similar buff here for Siege Defense and Siege Attack. And then this is how they get demons, it looks like. Instead of a buff, you can fill one of these slots with getting demon units added into your recruitment pool. That, I think, is a really interesting way of doing things. It limits your access to the demon pool, so the Warrior of Chaos race doesn't just replace the Monogods and Demons of Chaos races, while still giving you enough that it doesn't feel like you're just getting a little bit of flavor every now and then. For Furies, it definitely makes sense. Okay, now that I actually look at it. Okay, so you get one Fury immediately as soon as you take the buff, and then every 3 turns you get a Fury. That's a solid amount of Furies, not an extreme amount, but if you've ever played Nurgle in Warhammer 3, you know that the longer you leave that stuff running, you'll go without recruiting for a little while, and then suddenly you see you've got 30 Plague Bearers all stocked up for instant recruitment. So, if you keep that going for a while, you could probably build up a very solid stock of emergency Furies and Bloodletters and Demonettes. I mean, hell, once you get to the end of this tree, I assume it gets to where you can get the Greater Demons, and you'd want to keep the Greater Demon pool running just so you can have, as emergencies, when do I want a Great Unclean one? When do I want a Bloodthirster? I assume this being Azazel's tree, because Azazel, he's got the clear Slaanesh flavoring here. I'm going to assume that for Archaon, Be'lakor, Kolek, and Sigvald, it's going to be an undivided style tree, because Archaon, Kolek, and Be'lakor are undivided, and Sigvald is Slaanesh sided, but seems to still have the undivided stuff. I'm going to assume for them it's going to be more generic Star of Chaos, while Azazel gets the Slaanesh stuff, Violet gets the Tzeentch stuff, Valkia gets the Khorne stuff, and so on. And by the end of this tree, I'm going to assume that on some level, Azazel, Valkia, Violet will probably get access to some unique gifts sent to make up for the fact they can't pull demons from the other gods. And at the end of the tree here, for Azazel, I would assume they get Keeper of Secrets, and Valkia will, at the end of the tree, get a Bloodthirster, and for the undivided guys, they'll get a choice between all 4, or maybe they can take all 4. Sounds like a very cool campaign mechanic. Dark Fortresses and Vassals, they explain but do not show the UI. I think that's interesting. I'd like to see the UI, but I understand them wanting to hold off on it because they've still got 3 more weeks of 3 more weeks of news to build up. From the description, Dark Fortresses are, as we figured, settlements that can be occupied that are throughout the Chaos Wastes and Norsca. They have the odd thing that if you occupy them in Norsca, it will create and vassalize a Norscan tribe on the fortress, which seems to be a much better way of implementing the Awaken the Norscan Tribes mechanic that, for Wars of Chaos in Game 1 and 2, sucked ass. So that's a much better way of implementing that. It's going to be interesting to see how it works for the Dark Fortresses that are south of Norsca and the Chaos Wastes, because they have said that Middenheim and the Brass Keep will be Dark Fortresses as well, and we have to assume there's going to be more than that, especially considering that the Brass Keep and the Middenheim are so remarkably close together. Calls into question what Dark Fortresses there could be in Lustria, I guess. Anyways, that sounds cool. That sounds like a very fun way to implement Norscan vassals. And with the way the allied recruitment system works in the game, this means that as Chaos Warriors, once you vassalize some Norscans, you can start getting Norscan allied units. So that sounds like a lot of fun. The War Bands feature, which looks like, to my understanding, the Amazon recruitment tree from Total War Troy. I have not played the Amazons in Troy, so I don't know if it's exactly like just a rip or if it's just vaguely based off of it, but that's what I hear. And it is, each unit has a upgrade tree, and it looks really interesting. It looks like there's different upgrade trees for each god, and then another one for Undivided. I'm going to assume that for Undivided, it's just as simple as Marauders, Warriors, Chosen, Knights, and then over here Marauder Horsemen. But for Slaanesh, It's a full selection of marked Slaanesh units, including the new Forsaken of Slaanesh, Warriors of Slaanesh, Chosen of Slaanesh, Knights of Slaanesh, Marauder Horsemen of Slaanesh, and Chariots of Slaanesh. These are all going to be pretty interesting. For Azazel, I'm going to assume it's just a basis of you just want to upgrade everything into being marked for Slaanesh at some point. But for Archon, Kolek, Be'lakor, Sigvald, there you go. You are going to want to probably mix it up, designate specific roles. And beyond this, supposedly, all of these guys, but I just noticed it spends money and it takes a technology. That does make sense, just so you don't have, a Warriors of Chaos start and you immediately start upgrading, your generic Marauders into Chosen of Khorne or some insane nonsense. But that looks rad. And later on they have a list of all the new marked units, so I'll get to that in a little bit. And then the Path to Glory, which is simultaneously a way of adding the Ogre names, big name system to the Warriors of Chaos Lords and Heroes, while it looks like keeping them all active at the same time, which I think is interesting. I could be wrong. It would be crazy if they can keep all of these active at the same time, because Ogres have to choose between big names. And even then, the Slaughtermasters and Butchers don't get to have big names at all. And the big names look about as good as these Boons of Chaos do. Like, these are crazy. Like, additional 15% chance of wounding target just for doing a successful hero action makes that an amazing agent. Spreading additional Chaos Undivided Corruption by 2 is also pretty nuts. And then here you can see where you can mark your lords and heroes. And you can only mark some of the lords and some of the heroes for certain gods. I think that's going to suck at first. It's only going to be a matter of time before modders fill it out, or maybe even a second Champions of Chaos pack fills out the rest. Nonetheless, it is very, 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 very cool that you can mark lords and heroes for the various gods. And they will get unique models. This is, again, I think I said this earlier, this is something I thought was a pipe dream. This is something that makes Chaos so much more characterful and fun to play. And they also say, they also say that it will bump them up to Demon Princes after they get marked. Well, it doesn't exactly say that. It just says you can spend souls on Chaos Lords and Sorcerer Lords in order to promote them to Demon Princes. That makes me wonder if you can make them into Demon Princes Undivided. Because I don't see any UI there to make them Undivided Demon Princes. And I think it's supposed to be kind of rare for there to be Undivided Demon Princes. Because I think it's supposed to be kind of special that Yuri / Daniel / the Godslayer, whichever you want to call him, it's supposed to be kind of special that he's the first Undivided Demon Prince in a good while. Possibly, I want to say at some point in the lore, they implied that Be'lakor was the only Undivided Demon Prince. But yeah, the ability to upgrade lords and heroes into Demon Princes, I already thought was a very awesome idea, but I didn't know if it would happen. I figured it probably would, but who knows. But the ability to devote them to a god and get a unique model is so rad. And let's see, then there's the actual roster. So here we can see pretty well every single unit that Chaos Warriors had can now be marked for one of the gods. For one thing, for the lords and heroes, you can't have a Sorcerer Lord marked for Khorne. That's not a shocker. But you also can't have a Sorcerer Lord marked for Slaanesh. He can only take a mark of Nurgle or Tzeentch. Like I said, that's going to be lame at first, but I'm sure some modder is soon enough going to make it where you can mark a Chaos Sorcerer Lord for Slaanesh. Because I believe Sorcerer Lords can still take Lore of Shadows. Because I think that's probably... That's probably how it's going to work. Because the Warriors of Chaos get access to Lore of Shadows, Lore of Death, and definitely Lore of Metal, and maybe Lore of Fire. And each of those is associated with a Chaos God. Death is associated with Nurgle, Shadows with Slaanesh, both Metal and Fire are associated with Tzeentch. So, how I assume it's going to go is, you can recruit a Sorcerer Lord of Death, the Lore of Death, and he'll be able to get marked for Nurgle. Fire or Metal can get marked for Tzeentch. Shadows, and Sorcerer Lord can't get marked for Slaanesh at the moment. How exactly it'll work for the lore... Oh, well, I guess... And then I guess since you get two choices, because it looks like here when we see this UI, if you take a Chaos Sorcerer of Shadows here, he can either get devoted to Slaanesh and keep the Lore of Shadows, or get devoted to Slaanesh and lose the Lore of Shadows for the Lore of Slaanesh. I'm going to assume that for the Chaos Lords of Khorne, Chaos Lords of Slaanesh, you just get a regular generic Chaos Lord, and rather than having these two UI options of which lore he wants to get when he devotes himself to Slaanesh, you will instead get a Chaos Lord that then gets a choice between two UI options of Nurgle or Khorne. Or in this case, Khorne and Slaanesh. And it's the same kind of setup here with the heroes, yeah. You cannot have a hero level Sorcerer of Nurgle. That's a bit odd, but I get it. Like I said, I think the modders are going to change that. The War Shrine, the unique unit, can be devoted to each of the Chaos Gods. I'm curious to see whether it'll really change in appearance. Because there's always the freedom of kit bashing, but let's go up and see the picture of Azazel here. Like, I'll just probably go back and forth between this screenshot for a little bit. I guess that would have to be a marked War Shrine for Slaanesh, because it kind of looks like, hang on. Oh yeah, let's zoom in real hard here. It kind of looks like he's got the shaman or sorcerer or whatever on top of the War Shrine. Kind of looks like he's got the horsehair crest that the Slaaneshi warriors love to have. So I guess marking it for a Chaos God visually is going to change what the shaman operating the War Shrine looks like. It is rather odd that demon at the back kind of looks like it's either a Khornate or Tzeentchian demon rather than a Nurgle or Slaanesh demon, but I can't blame them for not changing that. But just looking around here, you can see marked Slaaneshi knights, marked Slaaneshi warriors somewhere around here. They have less ornate armor and they've got the horsehair crests, and we can see Chosen of Slaanesh with the big elaborate ram's horns. There's also oddly seems to be a difference between the skinny Slaaneshi Marauders and the beefy Slaaneshi Marauders. I'm not sure exactly why that is. I'm sure there's going to be a big difference between the two gameplay-wise, but that is definitely odd. Especially when we get into the Monogod side of the Slaanesh roster. Or the Slaanesh Monogod roster. And presumably the two will be right there side by side as recruitment options. Because I'm going to assume the Monogods won't get access to the war bands and unit upgrade mechanic that the Warriors of Chaos do. So the marked units that the Monogods get access to will probably just come directly from their building tree. That's my assumption for now. I'm sure Crave Assembly can explain later on, or we'll just see in gameplay. But yeah, we can see all the marked units here, and some of these are some pretty crazy changes. I mean, for Warriors of Chaos was already a race that had a decent selection of options, though I always felt they had one of the more boring rosters. It was generally just, heavily armored dudes who kick ass and are good in all situations. And, not big on the kind of catch-all solutions. I want armies that are more interesting both lore-wise and have more interesting roles in the strategy and tactics of it. And the ability to mark your units is going to be a big addition for that. It's going to make the Warriors of Chaos much more interesting to play. But if all of these marked units are also added into the Monogod rosters, just in campaign and custom battles, because they're almost certainly not... All these marked units are almost certainly single-player exclusive or custom battle exclusive. Because I cannot see the Warriors of Chaos roster in multiplayer being double the size of everyone else's. The Warriors of Chaos multiplayer roster is already one of the biggest. And similarly, so many of these marked units are so antithetical to Creative Assembly's intended design goal for the Monogods that I can't see them getting added. Because right here we've got Marauder Horsemen of Slaanesh with javelins, right? Slaanesh, in Warhammer 3 by default, the Monogod Slaanesh roster doesn't have any missile units. And while that could be an accident, I don't think it is. On some level, I think Crave Assembly wanted Slaanesh to be a melee-only race. along similar lines, you can get Marauder Horsemen of Khorne. And that is a straight-up Khornate missile unit. Not artillery, missiles, which Khorne usually thinks is cowardly. I mean, you can get Marauders of Khorne, who will presumably be quite cheap. Part of Khorne's old design goal, you can tell, was for them to not get any cheap units, to be all elite melee units. The cheapest unit they could get right now is Chaos Warhounds, who you can't really spam. Nurgle would get access to Knights of Nurgle. And Nurgle, in the game right now, and this is a problem they have in campaign, a serious problem they have in campaign, though not so much in multiplayer because domination works on different rules, is that Nurgle doesn't have any armor, doesn't have any shields, very slow units, not very much armor piercing, which are all big issues for them to have. Chaos Knights of Nurgle are fast, armored, shielded, and if you go up here, we can take Marauders of Nurgle with great weapons. We can see down here Warriors with great weapons for Nurgle. So Nurgle's going to have a lot more armor piercing now. Effectively, all these choices mean in campaign you can make Warriors of Chaos armies or Monogod armies that have no weaknesses. That's fine for campaign for the most part, because there are a lot more factors that go into a battle in campaign than just your army build. And on top of that, campaign battles on some level are always going to be unbalanced. And if you want them to be a bit more balanced, which I do, then that's what Drunk Flamingo's Tabletop Caps mod is for. But in multiplayer, this shit is bonkers. It is bananas. It is insane. It is batshit. This throws so much of the balance of both the Monogods and the Warriors of Chaos out the window if this roster gets included. So I can't see just about any of these guys making it into the multiplayer roster. That kind of does beg the question of, well, this kind of sucks for the multiplayer community. So many of the YouTubers are multiplayer guys, Indie Pride, Zerkovich, so on. I'm sure they play single-player campaigns every now and then, but for the most part, they're multiplayer guys. And this is a $20 probably DLC to give them 4 Legendary Lords, 4 Regiments of Renown, and the Chaos War Shrine. I guess we'll see if it's $20. I have to imagine it would be. Though if it was $10, my god, this would be a steal. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's pretty well no new animations here other than for the Legendary Lords and the War Shrine. But just in terms of the sheer amount of new shit you get with this DLC, that seems like a steal. Either which way, this is all very exciting news. So, Creative Assembly, the DLC team continually outdoes themselves. It's kind of insane. The Tomb Kings came out back in January of 2018, and at the time we were like, holy shit. You know, this changes everything. The Tomb Kings are the best race in the game. Why would I play anyone else? You know, the Vampire Coast, I'll admit, a little bit of a step down, but personally I'm just not a Vampire Coast guy, so I'm a little bit biased. But then when the Wood Elves Overhaul came out, that was like, oh my god. The Wood Elves are playing the game entirely differently in such a cool and interesting way. I don't feel like playing any of the other races. At any given time, when I'm playing Total War Warhammer, when I'm playing any of the races except Wood Elves, I'm like, man, I really want to start a Wood Elves campaign. And the Beastmen are OP as fuck, but the Beastmen similarly, extremely fun campaign. And with Warhammer 3, it looks like we're looking down the path of the DLC team again, tuning out a just absolute banger of a campaign for the Warriors of Chaos. I am very excited to see this. This is cool just right here. We're seeing a Slaanesh chariot. I wouldn't expect the Mark chariots to look all that different, but that Slaanesh charioteer guy, he looks rad. And purple banners. Every Slaanesh player knows. Purple makes everything better. I mean, this just sounds awesome. I'm extremely hyped for this. I guess that's all there is to say. I will see you folks until the next big reveal, which will probably be a week from now, though I don't know what they could really reveal. come to think of it, let me just speculate on that a bit. Because I think Valkia they're going to save for last. Valkia is the one everyone's been wanting. They might kind of go up in terms of where they think people want. Azazel's a surprise. Azazel's a character who's been more or less ignored since like 5th or 4th edition, I want to say. He's ancient. He's relevant to the lore because, like I said, old friend of Sigmar. That was part of the Sigmar novels, I think, by Graham McNeil? I've not read those, but they're on my list. But Azazel's a surprise. Violet, I think, he's from 8th edition, so he's relevant. But he wasn't a really fan-demanded character. He's got a neat miniature, but his lore is kind of eh. And there's not much exciting beyond that. So I think we're going to see Violet next. Festus has really cool lore. His miniature is kind of fun because he's pouring the poison down the guy's throat, but there's no way he's going to have that going on in the in-game model. But Festus, I think people are definitely excited for. And then Valkia is easily one of the most demanded characters. Like, the moment monogods were revealed, I'm going to be honest, I think a lot of people wanted monogods just because it guaranteed Valkia was going to get in the game. So, my bet is, next week we're going to see Violet, then Festus, then Valkia, and then after that it's probably only going to be a week before the DLC actually drops. Other than that, what they could do, because they've got some other stuff they're holding back now. This is part of the crazy thing of this build-up for Immortal Empires. Because they've not explained actually what Volkmar or Manfred will do with the Books of Nagash. They've not explained how Morathi's going to change. And Morathi is going to change. They've already said there's definitely going to be some corruption changes for her. And I would not be remotely shocked if Morathi also gets access to seductive influence and some Slaanesh units. So, we've already seen a massive dump of news, and yet we're coming up on more news. I mean, there's even, like, it's so crazy. They've already said they're changing the entire vampire count technology tree. That's going to be huge. Because the vampire count tech tree, was kind of some great techs, some shit techs. Really, the value of the vampire count tech tree, I guess, was getting free skeletons. Which, I'll be honest, I think the free skeletons tech was a mistake. Free zombies, I think, was a good idea. Because zombies are a unit that Total War players are generally disinclined to use. Unless you're getting a good bargain on them. But free skeletons made vampire counts notorious as the race you play for free skeletons and nothing else. And as a big vampire counts player, I thought that was really sad. There is so much of the vampire count roster that is awesome to work with, but people just built these fucking stacks of skeletons. Then again, I guess it can't be helped. The Cheezer guys, the Legend of Total War guys are always going to do their weird thing, and they're welcome to do it. I just think they're missing out on a lot of the actual fun of the game. But we haven't yet seen the full extent of the miniature rework that Norska's getting. Because the fact that Norska can occupy anywhere now is a huge change for them. Like, the coastal raiding was always a neat idea with Norska, but you felt very little inclination to do it. Like, usually it wound up being the smart option. It was usually the way to make the most money and try to keep yourself on the offensive instead of the defensive. But most people generally stuck to trying to unify Norska first and build up their provinces the same way you would with every other race. And that usually resulted in them just getting their asses pounded by Bretonnian and Imperial colonizers. So, I'm very fascinated to see what we're coming up on. There is going to be some rad stuff coming out in the next few weeks, man. It's going to be nuts. Either which way, folks, I'll see y'all later. As soon as there you go.